Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be going over NP gain, overkill, and looping. I wanted to cover these subjects for a while now because I often see a lot of misconceptions about how looping works or how NP generation works, the NP levels you need of servants and stuff like that. So I thought this would be a good one to cover to kind of set the record straight on some of this stuff. So stay tuned. Okay, so first off, let's start out by explaining how NP generation actually works. You guys can see on screen yet another formula. I know everybody loves math, and I'm going to try to break it down for you in as easy a way as humanly possible. We are calculating here the NP generation per hit. Where that's important is, remember, cards have hit counts on them. This is why cards' hit counts are so important. They're the primary factor driving the NP generation. The servant's actual latent NP charge attack stat is a big factor here. The amount of card type bonus up or down, as well as any sort of NP gen bonus. So that would be something like Nero Bride's NP generation skill that she can put on targets. And then any sort of modifiers for, say, the card position, if we're talking about not, say, an NP, but actual cards that you're using. So like whether or not they're the first card, the second card, or the third card. The enemy class, because certain classes give particular bonuses, like casters giving a 1.2 bonus to NP generation rate versus assassins or berserkers that are lower than 1%. And then overkill, and we'll talk about overkill later in the video, but basically overkill is the amount of damage you're dealing over a enemy's defeated body at that point. Once they've reached 0 HP, it's the amount of damage you're doing over that. Overkill actually modifies the amount of NP you're generating, so it's really nice to have. So again, to illustrate this point, we've put on screen here the modifiers for you guys. Now, you guys can see that arts and quick cards generate more gauge the later they are in the chain, like I just talked about. You can get even more NP gen by always starting with an arts card because it gives that 50% bonus every single time. That's going to be the only way to make a buster chain generate any noble phantasm. Otherwise, latently it generates none. So you have to start it with an arts card right now. Maybe they'll make a change to that in the future. That's actually something I've been keeping my eye on because I do think that JP is headed towards a place where it has to kind of address buster and quick cards against the arts meta that's currently going on, but we'll see. For now, just understand that the later you put a card in the chain, the more noble phantasm it will generate. This is why if you're looking to generate the most noble phantasm possible, you want to typically skew cards later in a chain. We talk about that actually in the carding video some, where you guys need to understand how to choose your cards. The important thing is to just denote particularly here the absolute difference between an arts and a quick card. This is partially what makes arts comps so powerful, is they just generate so much noble phantasm. So when we get to the quick cards, you sit there and you say, okay, quicks generate more crit stars and stuff, and that's their advantage. And we've talked about this before, but that's kind of the issue, is that there's numerous ways to generate stars even for an arts comp. So it ends up eating away at quick's benefit. And this is why, for a lot of reasons, especially damage as well, quick is regarded as not the best card choice. And you can still see that no matter what you do, the extra card will still have 100% NP generation rate. Yes, you can enhance that with the 50% arts bonus. If you get the extra card, good. If you didn't have a brave chain, oh well. You got to understand too that different servant types will generate more or less NP gauge per hit, like we talked about. Berserkers and assassins have a lower than 1% rate. That is a 0.8 or a 0.9, as you guys can see here. They are the worst classes to attempt to loop against. I often hear people say that berserkers are the worst. For me personally, I actually find berserkers not that hard in most circumstances, because while berserkers will generate less noble phantasm for you, it's a lot easier to get overkill against them. That is to say, you will kill them and have multiple hits potentially of an NP or a card go overkill on the target, as opposed to assassins where you might be trying to loop against them with, say, a neutral target, and then it becomes a bit of an issue because, well, yeah, they generate 10% more noble phantasm than a berserker. You're probably not getting to overkill nearly as easy. It just depends on the situation you're in, but basically the only thing you need to understand is both of those are terrible for looping against. Versus riders and casters, which both have a higher than 1.0 gain rate. So again, that's another good example right there. And most other classes tend to just have a flat 1.0 gain rate. Basically, keep your eyes peeled for casters and riders. They tend to be the easiest to loop against. Also, do understand here too that part of the reason for riders, if I had to guess, is assassins are typically, as a class, a little bit worse off for damage, so giving them a bonus to NP gen kind of helps out assassins with looping. With regards to casters, the important thing to denote here is while they are the best class to loop against, a lot of riders that can loop can typically only loop against casters because they are only able to by virtue of this extra 10%. You might be able to get them to work against another class at times, especially at a higher NP level, but a lot of loopable riders can just barely make the cut, and they do it against casters alone. And then lastly, as we were talking about, their Overkill or Overgauge as well helps you generate more Noble Phantasm per hit. Once you've finished off the enemy, you'll get 50% more. That's what makes Overkill and Overgauge so powerful. You get Overgauge whenever you're dealing with a break bar situation and you've basically broken the break bar, but it doesn't actually break until the next turn. You'll get Overgauge until that point. The important thing to understand here is there's actually a little bit of a display bug with regards to Overkill, and that is that any hit that kills a target, the Noble Phantasm is generated after the damage goes out. You can kill a target and you will get Overkill even though it won't display the Overkill on your screen. You will still gain the benefit of it. You will still get the increased percentage. It's just not going to give you the word Overkill flashing on your screen for that particular hit. So do keep in mind, any hit that kills the target will also generate Overkill, as well as all subsequent hits after that. And again, just as a refresher here to give you guys some examples, we thought we would throw in sort of a difference in cards that you guys can see the relative scalability. Now, just to explain this really quick here as we go through, this is going to be the position of the cards, the order of the cards right here as Arts Buster quick as we go down. The number of hits, we're using Squirtoria here as an example against a Saber enemy. The bonus, which is going to be the card type up, so Squirtoria gives herself 30% card type up. The NP gen bonus, there's no NP gen bonus in a Squirtoria regular use unless you've brought someone else in. The enemy modifier, because we're facing a Saber, it's just a 1.0 rate for NP gen. And then the position modifier of the various card versus, again, where we put it in that position. You guys can see the lead arts card here for Squirtoria with an Arts Quick Buster Chain generates 8% Noble Phantasm. That's really good. The Buster card, though, only generates 0.88, and that's bad. This is why we end up putting the Buster card second if we care about NP gen. If we care about damage, you probably want to put the Buster card first or third. Same thing with arts. You might want to either lead with it or put it last to generate more dependingly, but that's going to depend on hit counts and such. And Squirtoria actually has a decent amount of hit counts, as you guys can see. It's not just single hit counts across the board. Again, you only get 0.88 from that second Buster card, but the result is that you get to actually put the quick card third, and that allows it to actually generate a decent amount of Noble Phantasm, given that it has a 250% modifier with the arts card lead. It would have otherwise been 200% without an arts card lead in this position, but it's still a lot more than the 100% lead from putting it first. So really nice there. And as you guys can see, because of, again, the extra 50%, you're getting 4.42 off of the extra attack there. And the result of doing ABQ in this circumstance generates 18% gauge. That doesn't seem like a lot, but this is going to display the power of not only having external buffs from support casters that can further modify this, or even Nero Bride or something like that, but also look at the difference between a triple arts chain here. So now you guys can see, if we were to use an arts NP and then use the arts cards here as well to follow it up with Squirtoria, her arts NP generates 20% right off the bat. That's just insane. And then you still get an additional 20% from Squirtoria's overcharge effect, which is sort of cheating in this circumstance. But you guys can see, because you still have the position modifiers, you still have the type bonus, and you still have the card position coming into play here, you literally are going to end up with quite a significant amount of NP gen per card. And remember, this is just going to get further modified even more by that 20% bonus that you're getting from triple arts. So really a staggering difference overall in NP gen, and that's something I wanted to show you guys, the sheer power of a triple arch chain versus a normal chain. Now, yeah, Squirtoria has that NP and the overcharge effect going on, but still really cool. I just wanted to show you guys a side-by-side comparison, so to speak. And as we get to the next slide, you guys can see here too, this is the one that I wanted to talk about with regards to looping. You guys now know that for most circumstances, quick looping is designed as a system. In the Scotty system, it's designed to get back to 50% overall. That's all you care about, is from turn to turn getting back to that 50%. And the reason for that is because each individual Scotty has 50% charge in her kit. You only need to get back to that point, as opposed to, say, a art system that's kind of designed to get back to 100% charge. But we'll explain that in a little bit and how that changes. Lancelot here, as you guys can see, we're going to put him up against a berserker, assassin, and a caster just to kind of denote the various different enemy modifiers. And you guys can see the effects that it has on NP generation. We're just using his NP here. You guys can see he's got a 10 hit quick NP, which is a lot and really nice. So again, you're getting 30 hits overall out of this against enemies. Because of this, do understand that an NP is broken up into multiple hits. Not all these hits deal the same amount, but we'll talk about that in a further slide as well. So you can get overkill on, say, 3 of the hits as opposed to, say, all 10. But we'll, again, cover that more in detail there. But if you look at, again, the difference here, you guys can see against the Berserker, which is going to be the worst for Lancelot because he's a Berserker himself, he's only getting a 150% modifier against that class, rather than most classes getting a 200% against Berserkers. He's only generating 16% against that one enemy. He gets 18% against the Assassin here, so already you got a 2% difference just because he's still the same effectiveness, but that 10% difference in generation has made a tangible impact now. And then the 120% off the caster, he's now already getting 24%. That's actually low-key what's saving him a little bit here. So he ends up getting back to that 58%. You can imagine how it would have been difficult for Lancelot against all 3 Berserkers, possibly doable against 3 Assassins, and then very easy for him to loop against 3 casters. But again, this is using his 100% NP gen, so that's assuming his 3rd skill is active for this turn. If you're lucky enough to have a super scope, you could be using a fragment of 2004 to further boost his NP gain as well on an additional turn. But yes, you guys can see this would get him back to 50% and complete the loop. This is why in most cases we tell you guys it's not necessarily the NP level that you have. NP level can generate more damage for a unit, and it can deal with more of the hits becoming overkill and help the looping, but in most cases it's not required. When we talk about a servant being able to loop, we most of the time talk about it at NP1. And instead the only requirement then for being able to clear nodes is, can it kill? Not necessarily can it generate enough Noble Phantasm. Most nodes people at NP1 can loop against if they're a looper. If it's a harder node, no, they might not be able to, and that's where a higher NP level would be required. But those are fairly rare. Most of the time you're going to see that as a very hard 90+ event node that you see now on JP, or again a lotto type node, which is designed to sort of be a little hard to farm because of how lucrative it is to farm. A lot of that boils down to just, you can loop at lower NP levels and you can still farm a lot of content with it, especially free quest wise or story wise, but can you necessarily farm the hardest nodes at the lowest NP level? Not necessarily. But again, not so much a factor of loopability as it is damage output. Okay, so now for the next example here, I wanted to show you guys a arts example. Now you guys can see we're going to use Jarcher here, and there's a whole lot less hit counts at play compared to Lancelot. But remember, Arts generates a latent 300% versus 100% at quick. Arts cards go further within PGen, and that's what makes them so strong. So in this example, we're just going to be using double Castoria. And if you guys remember, I talked about how an Arts comp basically wants to get back to 100% automatically. With the onset of Castoria, it's not as big of a deal. It's not required to get back to 100% depending on the circumstances. Part of the reason for that is because you can start someone with starting charge, you can use a unit that has charge in their kit, and it basically helps offset that need to get back to a complete 100%. There's also the aspect of Castoria just being really good for NP gen and NP damage, and so overall she can help increase your capabilities for looping. And then even still, she still has a charge that, unlike Scotty, is broken up, so you can do it in 20% or 30% increments rather than a stock 50 all at once. So you don't have to make that hard choice about when to use it necessarily, and you can kind of pick and choose when and how to get it in there. But you guys can see we're still going to be going up against the Berserker, Assassin, and Caster here. You've got a 130% darts up with 100 coming from Castoria and 30% coming from Jarcher herself. And then we've got NP gen of 60% up coming solely from Castorias. John will actually have NP damage as well, which would help out the overkill amounts, but not necessarily relevant to just talking about NP gen here. John's gonna have really good time here against the various enemy types with, again, we're just using the Noble Phantasm as the example here, so the position modifier is all the same across these three enemies that we're denoting. You've got 24% against the Berserker. You've got a 27% against the Assassin. And remember, none of this is factoring in overkill. So like we talked about, it might be easier to get overkill and actually increase this number against the Berserker than the Assassin. And then you've got the Caster, which is generating 36 and is just way ahead of the other options there because of that wild swing in the amount that it generates. But you guys can see, boom, you've got 87%. So for that, all you would need is one of Castoria's 20% charge skills to get her back to full. And boom, there you go. That's a nice, easy arts loop. This is why we talk about this and the differences between a quick system and a art system and why it's sort of important. The same rules sort of apply. It's just their goal overall for where they're trying to end up at the end of the NP for the amount of Noble Phantasm they've generated is different. Hopefully one day they address that with quick, because that's actually one of the issues with quick right now is we get these weird 90+ nodes that are non-standard in makeup and have 1-2-1 layouts or 2-1-3 layouts or 3-1-2 layouts and stuff like that, and you end up in a weird spot. A lot of the reason for that is they wanted to bring single targets back into farming and make them relevant and useful again for that sort of thing, and that's perfectly fine. But it's caused quick to have some issues where arts can still kind of flourish in that environment for the most part. Quick often will struggle to do it, and especially do it efficiently with maximum CEs for event bonus or lotto drops or something like that. So that's kind of one of the issues and why you've seen arts become so dominant lately as opposed to quick. Okay, so now for the last slide here, we're going to talk to you guys about overkill in depth. And again, I know people have asked me to cover this, so let's actually go through it. With overkill, every card in Noble Phantasm has a predetermined number of hits. We've already talked about this before. Each hit does a set portion of the total damage. So to give you that example again, because we used Jarcher in the prior slide, you guys can see Jarcher has a 4-hit NP, but the hit counts are broken up in terms of damage, where the first hit will do 10%, the second will do 20, the third will do 30, and the fourth will do 40. If you wanted, say, 2 hits of overkill, it has to come here. So that would mean that the 30% would need to do the killing shot to get overkill, and the 40% would actually display your overkill thing here. But essentially, both of these would generate Noble Phantasm if the 30% is the hit that kills. If you actually manage to kill on 20%, congrats, you've managed to kill with just 30% of the Noble Phantasm's power. You overkilled the crap out of that. That is the definition of overkill. But again, for most things, you'll probably see it happening in the later amount of hit counts. That's the important thing to understand there. If you did it here, you would have used 60% of the NP's power to kill. The 30% and 40% would generate extra Noble Phantasm from the overkill 50% modifier that it gives. Just talking about that again, Overgauge and Overcharge occur whenever an enemy's health has 0 health remaining. That always occurs after the hit of the card. Do understand that. And so again, this increases the generation rate by 50%. Like we talked about, it might not display for that actual killing hit. So just keep that in mind, that even if you don't see the word overkill flashing on your screen, doesn't mean you're not getting the overkill. That's an important thing that I think a lot of people didn't realize. Just to show you an example here with Jarcher's NP, it would do 100k to an enemy with 50k health. We have the following. The first hit, there'd be 40k remaining. There's no overkill on it. The second hit would deal a 20k, and that would have totaled for 30k damage done. There'd be 10k remaining, and there'd be no overkill. But just to show you right here, again, there you go, your 30k and 40k hits. The 30% and 40% hits here, since we're using just a standard 100k, would each do overkill and generate an extra 50%. So that's what's nice. That's overkill in a nutshell, and that's how you can take advantage of it to get even more Noble Phantasm generated. In fact, you can actually pre-card an NP sometimes just to lower the health of an enemy to get more overkill out of it. So let's say you were sitting at like 48% NP generated in a quick loop, and you needed that 49% so that it would round up when you use the 50% Scotty charge to 100%. For those that don't know, yes, a 99% will round up to 100%. Only in that circumstance, though. If you ever get it to 199%, it refuses to round up. It's just a special thing they put in only for the 100% there to make sure that you didn't get really angry when you ended up at 99%. The reality of it is you end up still getting angry that you're at 98% instead sometimes, but it is what it is. So let's say you were at that 48% and you wanted that 1% extra gauge, but you couldn't get it somehow. Well, you could pre-card the NP and try to lower the health pool of one of the enemies so that you get one more hit of overkill. If you do that, yeah, you probably end up at 49 or even 50% because of that. And sure enough, you've got a consistent loop now. So that's a little tip and trick that I've used at various points in times, because I'm not the math guy. You guys know Mr. Bob Mosses is our math guy here on the channel. I, on the other hand, do a lot of stuff by feeling it out and experimentation, and that's why I typically have a good mind for this sort of stuff and can understand how it works even when it's laid out mathematically for us, because I've had to figure some of this stuff out on the fly. But yeah, it's a nice little trick you can use. To cover our last little bullet point here, and this one's a bit of a doozy, there is also another bug with overkill. This has been something that's probably been in the game since the beginning that wasn't discovered till relatively later on. It was kind of discovered around the time that Musashi released, just after the Solomon raids at New Year's. Basically, it was noticed when Musashi was using her fifth form skill, because that increases the number of hits, but people were trying to calculate that and they noticed all of a sudden that it was dealing way more NP gen than they realized, and they wondered why. Well, there's a bug with overkill that apparently, and we call it a bug, we don't know if it's intended or not. Either way, it's been left in the game, so at this point I think you can assume it is intended. It's not going to ever get patched or fixed or removed. It's just kind of how we've started to refer to it. If you have a single card deal more than 50% of an enemy's remaining health, every subsequent card in the chain will benefit from overkill despite the target still having HP. And again, do note that this is just like the other little display bug before. The notification won't appear telling you have overkill. You'll just get more gauge from it. So to explain this again, this means, let's say we take the 100k example for a enemy's health remaining. If you were to deal more than 50k with one card, then every card after that would gain the benefit of overkill, even though the enemy isn't dead. In fact, that's the only way this can take advantage. If you were to say, slaughter the enemy entirely with an NP or something like that, well, it doesn't matter, you were getting overkill with the subsequent cards anyways. It's a weird gimmick. It can only manifest itself between you dealt more than half of the damage, but you didn't kill the enemy. So it's more like you just hit the enemy so hard that you hit it for more than half of its remaining health. Even though it's still alive, you still gain the overkill from those cards that you use after it. That's really nice. It's a really cool effect, and I think you've probably taken advantage of it without even realizing it at times. But yes, that is the overkill bug in a nutshell. Kind of hard to plan around, and again, it's kind of weird because if you have the capability to one-shot the enemy, you should just one-shot the enemy rather than trying to abuse it for the overkill bug. But maybe you need more Noble Phantasm generated, and so you realize that you can kill the enemy, and you can somehow plan around that and make sure that you just barely underkill the enemy so that both your cards still deal effective damage. I don't know. I'm just gonna say that at the end of the day, if you can pull that off, more power to you. But yes, that is the overkill bug in a nutshell. Okay guys, that's gonna be it for me today. We covered, again, overkill, the overkill bug. We covered looping. We covered the card positions and NP gen, how it's calculated. I hope that kind of serves as a nice primer for you guys to understand. And I also tried to talk to you guys a little bit about, you know, the differences between a quick and an art system, why you might need higher NP levels and when, where it's more important. So I hope that kind of sets the record straight for you guys and helps you to understand kind of how looping works a little bit more, and you know how overkill works and overgauge and how you can apply them and use it to get more Noble Phantasm. So if you guys enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, comment. It helps the channel out a ton. We are trying to grow here. As always though, too guys, don't forget I stream weeknights FGO at 7 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find the link in the description below. You can also join our Discord. We've got a great community on there. You're more than welcome. You can come in, ask questions, exchange friend codes, you name it. So I will see you guys for the next one. Have a good day.